did and how they personally have adjusted their approach to ensure a more diverse and inclusive workplace. And so that is our goal for the morning. Like I said, my name's Tina Nguyen. I'm a medical student at LSU Medical School in New Orleans. I graduated from Tulane in 2018. And of note, I currently am a co-founder and a senior advisor for a student group called Students Advocating for Equity in Medicine. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves at this time. Liz, you want to go ahead and get started? Hold on, you're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Bernick-Huber. I graduated from Tulane in 2008. So I think we were the first class to spend time at Tulane before and after Katrina. I had a communications major in business minor. And immediately following Tulane, I went back to grad school to get my master's in early childhood education. I was teaching school for about 7 years, always kind of knowing that I may want to go back into business at some point, but something related to children. So I would say one of the biggest surprises of my life was taking my own babies. They were 1 and 2 to survival swim lessons. And it was just a way to safeguard my kids, something to check off the list and get over with. And I saw my kids that are ages 1 and 2 learn to swim, float, and self-rescue. And I quickly decided to become a self-rescue instructor and start my own business. Started wearing a wetsuit to work, and about a year after that, we founded the Cass Water Safety Foundation. So our mission is to increase access to self-rescue swim lessons. If you all have seen those YouTube videos or TikToks of babies rolling back to float, that's what we do. Beyond the shock value of it, drowning is the leading cause of death for kids 1 to 4. So we're working not only to empower them and give them a really cool life sport, but also to protect them in and around water. And I'm really proud to be here today. I wasn't entirely sure that I fit the mold or was qualified to speak about this, but I'm here to learn as much as anything. And I think just starting to show up to these conversations is a huge first step. So I'm honored to be here and excited to chat with all of you.
Lida, go ahead.
Okay, Ohio gozaimasu. Good morning from Japan. I'm Commander Lida Cooper. Thank you to the Women Making Waves organization for inviting me to participate in this panel today. Right now, I'm the Chief Staff Officer of Fleet Activities Yokosuka in Japan. It's one of the largest Navy bases overseas. We're about an hour south of Tokyo. I graduated from Tulane University in 2004 and was commissioned through the Naval ROTC program there. I think almost anyone who's been on campus is familiar with the Navy building on the corner of Ferret and McAllister. I live here with my husband, who's also in the Navy, and our 4 children and 2 dogs. I'm on this panel not because I'm necessarily a DEI professional, but because at this point I've had nearly 18 years of experience leading people from all walks of life in a very large organization. I've been part of small teams. I don't know if you noticed, but in my bio, I was the commanding officer of a patrol craft in Bahrain. That team was very small. I was 1 female out of 29 people. My team here in Yokosuka is nearly 1,400 with just incredible amounts of diversity, starting with 1/3 of the Yokosuka team is Japanese. The US military has made some major statements recently regarding diversity and has promoted it in a way that I haven't seen done in my career. And I really just wanted to be part of this panel to highlight that and talk about some of the experiences that we've had as an organization. And then also my personal experience, just being a woman in a predominantly male profession. When I first came into the Navy, the service was roughly 14% female. When I went to my first ship, I flew into Singapore 2 weeks after I graduated from Tulane and left New Orleans. And there were 6 women on my crew of 300 people. But we were on an upward trajectory then, and we still have been. So over the time I've been in the Navy, we've grown to 20% women. We've had milestones such as our first 4-star female admiral who also happens to be African American. All the jobs are open to women now, Navy SEALs included. So there's been a lot of progress, but I think as in any major organization, there's still lots of areas that need work. Discrimination still occurs. Usually it's less bad jokes, more and blatantly sexist policies, but more combating our inherent biases, microaggressions. It would be great to get past the novelty of predominantly female teams and provide better accommodations for families with 2 working parents. But I'll acknowledge, while there are many minority experiences that I haven't had, I do want to promote those conversations and discussions that will help us grow, be more inclusive, and ultimately create a more equitable society for everyone. And that's what I'm hoping we are going to do here today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz and Lida. So as both of them have touched on just now, I want to make sure that I start this conversation with a few kind of caveats or asterisks to our, the discussion that we're about to have. But I have been keeping an eye on the Whova app, and I'm seeing your questions, which I hope to incorporate as much into this conversation as possible, but also some of your concerns about the kind of diverse representation on this panel. We want to acknowledge that and make sure that, we're saying that we hear you, and Liz and Lida both recognize that. But we also want to make sure that we're thinking about the fact that maybe we're giving everyone an opportunity in their workplace to be a leader in DEI, regardless of what your experiences are, and to be able to do that in a respectful way. And that serves everybody on their team. So I hope that we can make this as much of a discussion between us and our audience as possible. So feel free to add comments and questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to address them as we go. And then additionally, I want to add that most of these conversations, if you've had experience in DEI work, they have a tendency to revolve around issues of race and gender, as they should, because those are huge issues. But we want to make sure that we're not leaving out any other kind of issues that might come up, whether they pertain to people who have disabilities or people who identify as LGBTQIA or people from different nationalities. That list can go on and on. And we want to make sure that, our conversation might lean in one way, but that doesn't mean that those issues are not important and that we don't care about them. And so I think both of you really have started by telling us how you see your role as it pertains to diversity and inclusion work in your field. But I'm going to start with Lida, and this is a question that one of you posted, but what experience or issues have most significantly influenced the DEI initiatives in your organization?
So I think there, like most of the country, there's 2 kind of major events that happened in the last few years that have really set a new tone for where we are in diversity and inclusion. But this didn't start in 2020. I can find good policies from 2011. I think they stood up the commission in 2009. But really, where our leaders stood up and took a stand most vocally was after the death of George Floyd. So the Secretary of Defense made a statement, the Chief of Naval Operations made a statement, Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy really tried to put some energy behind what had kind of been being done in the background before. But what do we do in the military? We tend to go back to our core values in the Navy, their honor, courage, and commitment. And so historically, the military has been a leader on diversity issues. Usually we're kind of at that crossroads between blue collar and white collar work, and who we accept and all, driven by a pretty serious mission. And so we've always kind of patted ourselves on the back, but I think 2020 really put it in our faces that we aren't immune to bias and prejudice, seen or unseen, deliberate or unintentional, and that they have a direct effect on the morale of our troops, the cohesion of our teams, and mission readiness, our ability to, fight the nation's war and be prepared to do that. And so we just have to continually do better. So in June of 2020, the Secretary of Defense stood up an internal DoD board on diversity and inclusion. They also stood up a Defense Advisory Committee on diversity and inclusion, trying to make some long-lasting cultural changes. And we can probably debate here for a while about whether those have been long-lasting and, they've made the cultural changes, but in some ways I do think that they did, and they definitely got started. The second event that I think really opened up the military's eyes to some of these issues were the events in the Capitol in January of 2021. And so that prompted the Secretary of Defense to put the entire military, we had to do an extremism stand down. So he charged all of, we call them triads, it's the commanding officer, the executive officer, chief staff officer, and our command master chief. Again, this is Navy language, but it was a DoD initiative for everyone to give like face-to-face training or virtually, again, but still eyeball to eyeball, not recorded messages to be played back later, to the troops and sailors, talking about the damaging effects of extremism, and trying to develop more effective, sustainable ways to eliminate the corrosive impacts of extremism can have on the force. So we all took oaths to the Constitution, and that we won't tolerate those who participate in actions that fundamentally go against our oaths. Like we took, and during this training, we took our oaths again, like just to kind of remind ourselves. And so I think that's really what we have tried to, at the end of the day, I think we can go back to our core values and the principles upon which our particular, or my particular organization was founded. And I think that has some carryover effects for most organizations. I saw a question about politics and such, but I think to rise above, you've got to get to what your organizational values are. Luckily, I do have one that kind of has laid it out. We've had our core values for a very long time now. And so diversity, inclusion, and the importance of it, and then actioning it, like actually making these changes and being better is just part of it.
Thank you so much for your answer. And, kind of explaining the whole history of sort of how the military has been handling these issues. I want to pivot a little bit and pose a question for Liz, which is, you've mentioned that your organization's mission is to bring life-saving training to all children and their families, which you expressed in our, preparation meetings that this was something that was even more important in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you expressed that there were members of your community, particularly people of color, who had a hard time trusting, swim lesson providers with their children. And so can you talk a little bit about what was kind of required of you to gain their trust and, work with this community to provide this service? Hold on, can't hear you.
You guys will have to keep reminding me. I forgot to say in my intro that we are Chicago-based, if anyone's wondering, but we do provide nationwide scholarships, and we're working on having partners nationwide with the end goal of reaching, having an instructor or 2 or 5 in New Orleans. A lot of people don't know that Louisiana is double the drowning rate. But to answer your question, historically, people of color, for a variety of reasons, have had less access to pools, less access to swim lessons. And absolutely any parent who can't swim for whatever reason has a really difficult time empowering their child to do the same. Fear is a learned emotion. Anxiety is easily, I see a question about children with disabilities popping up, so we are definitely going to get to that. We are definitely able to transfer our anxiety to kids. A lot of parents will say, my child's afraid, and actually, usually they're just uncomfortable. They're crying because we are adults that they've never met before, putting them in cold water, and they would do the same if we held them at the park. But we have just a number of parents, too many to ignore, that don't swim themselves and who have been to 5, 6, 7 swim programs and have 5 or 6-year-olds that still aren't swimming. And eventually, they're told like, oh, he's just not ready, or swimming's just not for him. And we absolutely, we do not believe that. So COVID and the pandemic was actually fantastic for us as far as trust building, because our lessons are one-on-one. They always have been. That's the nature of how we teach a child to swim and self-rescue, and they meet daily for about 6 or 7 weeks. One child, one instructor in the water with their parent right there poolside. So one by one, well, not only were people more able to make this commitment because they were working from home, but we became very sought after from a safety standpoint for making sure that we didn't all give each other COVID. So one by one, through our scholarship program, we give scholarships to pretty much anybody that needs one. We actually decided not to define it as who we thought we needed scholarships. We put a few groups out, but the big bold print under our scholarship statement was we aim to be inclusive, and please let us know if you need a scholarship for any reason. We had plenty of people that didn't even financially qualify, but who had spent $3,000 on swim lessons before, or $5,000. And we're quite frankly just tired of giving their money away for no result. So we started giving scholarships to people that could come. Many of them were people of color. Many of them were parents with children with special needs or physical disabilities. And seeing that same family day after day with mom or dad or grandma or everybody poolside allowed us to earn trust, get results, and get people talking. So I hate to say that the pandemic was good to our industry, but we're one by one breaking down those barriers and showing kids what's possible, and helping make sure that that anxiety for everyone is lifted and that we move forward for the future. A lot of times we've had one instructor swimming a child and another instructor down at the other end of the lane teaching mom and dad to swim. So just one family at a time for every generation, making sure they know it's possible. And it's just about trust, commitment, and highly qualified instructors. I don't know if I should talk about the scholarships for physical disabilities now, or you have another question that we do a deep dive into that. So
before you get to that, I just wanted to ask you a follow-up. I know that sometimes these conversations are difficult, the ones that you probably have with these families. What have you taken from those conversations? How are you navigating them, and how are you bringing them into kind of your future, kind of how you operate on the day-to-day?
I think a lot of us were taught incorrectly that it doesn't have to be about color, and just ignore it and treat everybody the same. And we've learned that in aquatics, people don't want to be treated the same. They want us to know if they, for whatever reason, they haven't had access to swimming, or whatever reason this hasn't worked for their children yet, they don't want it to be ignored. They don't want it to be brushed under the rug. And just as recently as last week, we had a parent come in, and her son has special needs. So we had already had kind of a rough start to lessons, and she had shown up with her bathing suit on and had said, oh, I need to dive in and save him if I need to. And, we were probably being insensitive and thinking, why would she need to save the kid on a one-on-one swim lesson? But she kept telling us about his added needs and how we need to understand his plan. And we sat together for an hour and a half, and never once did I think, oh, this could be about color. I thought it was about his special needs. And I, went through with my teacher hat on. Our assistant director is a special ed teacher as well. And 6 weeks later, she had earned trust in our program. Her son was swimming and floating and walking and dancing like he owned the place. And she said, I was the only woman of color in this building, and I wore my suit because I just couldn't trust you yet. And I was going to dive in and save my kid. She said, there's kids of color in pictures on the walls, and I know you guys are trying, but that's what it was about. And I just want to thank you for sticking with me and not giving up on us. And I learned then, you know, you're not doing anyone a favor to assume that it's not about that, or to pretend everything's okay, or to pretend that we're on an even playing field. So another mom, and I will quote her, she said, "I do not financially qualify for these lessons. We have plenty of money. My husband is not going to pay another white person to not teach my son to swim." And I said, "Come on in, let's see what we can do. You're absolutely right. He should have learned from the very beginning." So knowing what we don't know has been huge, and just being open, having the conversations, understanding that those stories may come out of the woodwork 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later. Some people we work with for years, and they say, "We've been coming here for 2 years, and I'm finally ready to tell you that I'm here because my brother drowned when I was 10. We actually have a silly little poem that everyone has to read when they come in, about just acknowledging that nobody knows why each other is here, and this is not a competitive sport. They knock our socks off every day. You just, not to be cliche, but it's that quote about, you know, be kind, for everyone you know is fighting a hard battle." So we're here to learn, and I think people are starting to talk about the fact that we're here to learn, and to tell their friends, like, "Hey, you can go there, give them a chance, and you know, when you're ready, they want to hear and learn from your story."
Thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. And I think, you know, your experiences have been true for a lot of people who do similar type of work. So I hope that you all find some of that helpful. Before we move on, I had a question that was sent in for Lida. We were hoping that you could clarify that you used the word extremism kind of in the training that was in response to the riots at the Capitol, but not specifically kind of training on racism or sexism. So in these trainings, were those kind of issues specifically addressed, or was that mostly a training that happened in response to that event?
So I was keeping up with the question up until the very end. It was definitely training issued in response to the event. And it came about because it wasn't just extremism, because there was people were very passionate about ice cream. It was because people, the extremist elements that we saw were because there was folks who were trying to create environments that encourage discrimination, hate, harassment. And those are, we feel very strongly that we have a military and a working environment, and, ultimately a society that should be free of discrimination, hate, and harassment, and that any of those elements that exist in the military need to be, like, personnel who have those types of views need to be put on notice. The whole crowd needs to know that there's, expectations of them to, when you see something, say something. Because when you get into the diversity training, I think, or diversity in some of our large groups, you get into like, oh, we're going to be open to everything. And I think what we saw on the other side of some of our diversity and inclusion trainings is that there are still boundaries to that. Like it's not open to hate. It's not open to harassment, and you can't use these unique identifiers and discriminators about people to spread that. And it's not, again, being open to other people's experiences. There are still certain ones that are not appropriate. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think you really were kind of getting at the idea that, that you've had that it wasn't just like this was training in response to a certain thing and you are going back to your core values. But that set of core values also encompasses other kind of isms like racism and sexism that you all don't or aim to not stand for. So actions were taken to address those things.
Yes.
And to kind of go back to that idea of you operating out of this set of core values, what are some strategies for encouraging non-diverse leaders or leaders who don't necessarily belong to the minority group to kind of take ownership of action on DEI issues or initiatives?
So I thought Liz actually just gave great examples of how to do this very effectively, especially with people who are so, vulnerable with something like swimming and being in the water. I don't know that even in my profession, even though it has this sort of life or death connotation, that we necessarily deal with that on a day-to-day basis. But I saw that the question said non-diverse leader. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. I think in these conversations, it's very contextual because you could be the minority in one group of people and you could be the majority in the other. And it just depends. We're all kind of a multifaceted people, and there's all these different things that make us unique. But I think when you find yourself maybe feeling like you're in the majority versus the minority, whatever the case is, I think it's exactly what Liz was talking about, which is being self-aware of your biases, doing a whole lot more listening than talking, and then taking the lead from those around you about what actions are most meaningful to them and what direction they think the organization or the group needs to go. I think to truly change, everyone has to get comfortable with being vulnerable. And then one of our core values is courage. I think vulnerability and courage are really kind of a handshake. So we owe it to ourselves, like for us as leaders, to be vulnerable and to demonstrate that, even though it's very uncomfortable for some of us. And then to, when people are being vulnerable in our teams or groups, to promote that and be supportive. And then finally, again, just being maybe a non-diverse leader in a diverse group or trying to promote it, taking the different voices seriously. So fighting the urge to have people conform. So I definitely have experienced that. And I've seen that a lot in the Navy, at least, especially when I first got in. When I was very junior, there was, so we're on ships, right? And you have to get on the phone and talk to other ships. And they're like, oh, you should lower your voice, so you sound more authoritative, more manly. I mean, there's just, we wear uniforms. There's a lot of things to conform to, but at the end of the day, people need to be themselves. And the more we encourage the people in our organizations to be themselves. I was listening to the president's opening about being our authentic selves, and it's exactly what I have in my notes is, us as leaders owing it to ourselves to be authentic to our folks, because I know I was having a conversation with a group of junior women leaders, and they look to more senior people to demonstrate themselves, to be as much girl or as little girl or as manly or feminine or masculine or all the different characteristics that you could have. They are looking for a little bit of themselves in you. And so we have to do that. And then again, I kind of started with taking different voices seriously, but really like taking the voices that don't sound like our own as seriously as we do the ones that sound just like us. And I think that can be the most difficult, but it's just so important to what we do to understand that we can get important information and delivered to us in unexpected ways, but they're no better, no worse. They're just different, and that's okay.
Thank you for that answer. To kind of go off of this idea of being authentic to yourself, and not conforming to kind of what the status quo is. This question is for Liz. How do you navigate kind of challenging the status quo or culture of an organization that you belong to? Although it sounds like maybe that's not the status quo at your organization, but what do you do to move forward when you're met with kind of pushback or resistance?
Good question. Yeah, so we are a tiny organization. We're at our pool office right now in Forest Park, Illinois, and we have 3 full-time staff members and a variety of instructors who are independently contracted. They share our core values. We all share a certification from an organization that was created in the 60s. There's about 1,000 certified instructors now. And it's fantastic. They've created the technique which allows us to teach babies how to save their lives from the #1 risk. But that said, it's very hazy on, are we a team? Are we not a team? Do we identify together? We talked about core values a bunch here. The CAST has core values. One of them is active inclusion. The certifying body has never listed core values or beliefs. However, we're all bonded by this unshakable commitment to this mission that speaks to all of us. Many of us fell in love with it through our kids. I really have to make sure I could talk about this forever, you guys. So I'm trying to summarize, even though there's a lot of moving pieces here. So my children are profoundly gross motor delayed. You would not know it if you looked at them. They are very verbal. To me, they're very cute. But everything that they ever had to do that was physical was nowhere near on track. My 7-year-old is on the swim team now, but she still has to hold my hand to walk down the stairs if she wants to alternate feet. And they're not riding bikes yet. So when they were 1 and 2, the 1-year-old wasn't clapping her hands together, and the 2-year-old was still crawling on the stairs and not jumping. And they learned to swim, float, and self-rescue. And it knocked our socks off. We all of a sudden had kids that had an environment that they could be active in. And even at those young ages, we saw them eating better, we saw them sleeping better, we saw them getting along better. They were just happy and proud and confident. They saw something that they wanted to do and they actually could. And coincidentally, about a month later, guys, I'd already graduated from Tulane, and then I'd already told my parents, oh, actually, I'm going to be a teacher. And then I graduated from DePaul University, and I'd been teaching for 7 years. And I secretly decided I was about to become a swim instructor and was just getting up the courage to, have that, what looked like a midlife crisis. And I was at a business conference with my family, and we met a Navy veteran who had lost his eyesight in Afghanistan. I don't know if you know him, Letta. His name is Brad Schneider. But he was a swimmer in high school. And when he was at Walter Reed, that's what it's called, right? When he was at Walter Reed, all these people came up to him and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And his swim coach came up to him after, a million chocolates and flowers and unfortunate feeling, condolences. And he said, hey, we're practicing next week. Do you want to come? And he got back in the pool, and it was an environment that he could navigate without his eyesight. So I eventually learned that there is something called the healing power of sport. And I realized that that's what happened to our family when my kids learned to swim, float, and self-rescue. Our very first scholarship type was for kids with physical disabilities or for kids of parents with physical disabilities. We've taught children with no hands and no feet to swim, float, and self-rescue. And if a child who's 6 years old and nonverbal and doesn't have hands and doesn't have feet can swim, float, swim across our pool, absolutely anybody can. And so we've really kind of used that as an indicator of we get to safeguard kids in an environment that's empowering and that anyone can navigate. So challenging the status quo, we're new, we're small. There's instructors that have 40 years experience. There's a lot to be learned here. And the parent organization, who I very much respect, they do have a nursing team that allows us to reach kids with any disability, and they give us protocols. It's not, I don't know if it's encouraged or discouraged to be inclusive. It's never, ever talked about. Summer of 2020 came and went. There were no statements. I send a growing number of kids with physical disabilities to the team that evaluates the medical registrations, and they're approved, but it's just business. And knowing what it gave my kids that have not even a qualified disability, if anything, and seeing that it's not celebrated and shouted from the rooftops really gets under my skin, I guess, for lack of a better word. So the other thing about our parent organization, who I love, you know, you guys, they gave me my whole passion and my whole career, but they have their limitations. They have historically been extremely cliquey. And so, you know, we think that we're the best, and we teach kids to be the strongest and the safest. And it's just been cliquey, no collaboration with any other foundations or organizations. It's called ISR. So hopefully the leaders aren't on the Zoom. I think I would know if they were. But I learned through, I serve on a volunteer board for the United States Paralympics, and I learned through that board from a Paralympic skier who was paralyzed from the waist down when he was in college. He said, we have to stop saying, I can't imagine. We have to put people that look differently on the big screen, on a billboard. If people can't look at something that is unthinkable to them, they can't empathize, they can't be part of the solution. And so, against the advice of some of the mentors in the organization, I started sharing photos, not only of kids of all different colors swimming and floating, but especially of kids with physical disabilities. And it connected me to the other people who had wanted to do the same. And so while I haven't made a dent quite yet in our parent organization, I have kind of changed the status quo of we only talk to each other, and I've met other organizations that very much care about the same thing. And together we're learning and growing and trying to set an example. And every couple of weeks I get sort of a cautious message from someone that has been in the original organization for years that says, hey, I really like what you're doing and I want to do it too. And I just didn't know if it would be celebrated. So again, we're very new. We had no idea what we were getting into, and we're humble and learning every day, but just talking about it, just knowing that all kids deserve to be safe. They all deserve to be active, and there's nothing to hide, and a whole lot to celebrate has really helped us, I hope, start to make a name for ourselves.
Thank you so much for, you know, being vulnerable and talking about your experience with your own children. But I think you made a really good point, which is especially when doing DEI work, everybody wants to go at whoever's at the top and like to make the big change and to have everybody commit and be on the same page. But sometimes that takes time, and to focus on doing the little things that you can do in your everyday, like those are also changes and things that we should also be trying to do. So one of the things that we wanted to also talk about was, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second there. So this question is for Lyda. Obviously, over the course of the last 2 years, starting with the murder of George Floyd, and not saying that, you know, this was kind of a big nidus for a lot of organizations to start talking about diversity and inclusion in a more serious way, maybe that they haven't done so before. And that's not to say that these kind of horrific events don't happen or haven't happened over the last, you know, couple of decades and even centuries. But in our time right now, that was a huge event that caused a lot of organizations to start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do we keep those conversations going and to ensure that changes are being made, and that those changes are meaningful to kind of make sure that we're still having those conversations, not just 2 years out, but 10 years out and forever.
Right. So I think that's the really hard part. I think that's where a lot of our organizations trip up, is the doing it for the long haul. So again, it's kind of debatable on how well the Navy does it. I think there's a lot of shortcomings as far as, 2 years ago, if you look on the diversity and inclusion pages, websites and such, all the policies are dated like 2020, and then there's like nothing. But theoretically, in those policies and the reports, when the task forces were, did submit their report and were stood down, when the trainings were conducted and such, that some of this was a little bit baked in that because you need sustained attention to it. So if you build in processes where you have these elements in your organization to provide you regular feedback so that you can continue to take action and adjustments and make improvements. Some of the ways the Navy has done that, so this isn't necessarily new for the last 2 years, but we do command climate surveys. They're supposed to be done after commanding officers take within 90 days of them taking command, and then annually. So it's an anonymous survey that no one is forced to participate in, but we encourage participation. The more information, the better. And it looks at our climates, our organizational climates across a wide range of topics, including diversity and inclusion topics. And I think that the questions have gotten better since we put a focus on it. And and then because of the trainings and such, people understand what we are asking about and what information we're looking for, to try to make the right adjustments. Because again, different again, the Navy is gigantic. So what is a meaningful change at different levels of our organization, and then even just across teams? So at Fleet Activities Yokosuka, what's a meaningful change to us? So that's one of the tools we use. We also have multicultural committees that have their, monthly ways to celebrate diversity. As everyone knows, it's Women's History Month, but, trying to give, in this case, our junior sailors a platform to really share their experiences and, be their authentic selves and to be vulnerable, and all those things I kind of talked about before. Like, I see myself as a leader who needs to set the example, encourage the conversations as they happen, but then to also just create venues for people to have conversations about it. And so that's some of the ways we do that. And so again, you've got, to me, it's great when you have something spontaneous, but the policies are where you really ingrain it in, so that people can't get away from it. You can, we know this is going to happen, and when this happens, this is going to give us information to turn around, and then we're going to set our metrics, and we're going to slowly make our way down the path, eat the elephant one bite at a time, if you will, because these problems and issues are not small. And it's going to take repetition and a consistency factor to actually make long-lasting change. And again, some organizations are more receptive to it, and so it catches faster, and some things are easy and some things just aren't. And it takes time, and that's what I think we need to do as leaders, is to make sure that our policies have these type of kind of, it's not always about your current motivation, because our motivation goes up and down, but what's our why, what's going to keep us in it for the long run.
I hope I can interrupt really quickly. I think going back a few minutes, to hear a military leader remind us all to be vulnerable is everything. So thank you. I was going to tell you that on the side, but there's just so many mixed messaging of, show up and fake it till you make it, which I do not like that saying. But we have to be vulnerable in, you know, a society that's really so shaken and so primed for change. But also, you know, if something doesn't scare you a little bit, you're probably not going to grow and change. And taking part in this panel definitely fell out of my comfort zone. But even before we spoke with you all, I realized, speaking with the panel that we are on in preparation last week, we have active inclusion listed as our values. We have since, you know, we first created a website that anyone could go to in 2018. But when our parents take a survey, we ask them about their experience with some of our other values, communication and instruction. We don't ask them about inclusion. So, you know, I was told by my grandpa, who I respect very much, you have to talk with your feet. Saying you're going to do it is one thing, but showing up and making it happen is another. And so that's on our survey now, but, you know, just knowing how far we all have to go and just accepting that and being ready for the changes that as they come is huge. So with vulnerability, here I am adding to our survey that wasn't correct. So thank you.
Thank you for adding. I want to draw some attention to the conversation that we have going on in the chat for anyone who's not kind of looking at their chat box right now. But we have a great suggestion from Lisa Thompson about doing a quarterly pulse check in regards to specifically DEI issues, if that's something that your organization values, and that gives employees the opportunity to express kind of any concerns that are happening kind of on the day-to-day in a very predictable amount of time so that they can be addressed quickly and in a timely manner. Lee Walls, I hope I pronounced your name right, in saying that for their organization, they're coming up with a common language around DEI so that everyone in the organization is on kind of the same page about what is inclusion, what is diversity, all of those things. And so to say that everybody's on the same page gives you a jumping off point for kind of putting actions into place or making changes happen. So I think that's also an excellent idea. And just to add from Daisy Kane that, you know, having everybody be on the same page starting at the top definitely moves all of these things forward more quickly than doing it grassroots, starting with employees and going up for sure. And so if you do have the opportunity to speak to your superiors, or if you are that superior to kind of initiate these changes from where you are, like those are very important. It makes the process much easier for your employees and the people who work under you, for sure. So thank you so much for adding to this conversation. We love hearing from you. And so we have a little over 30 minutes, and we all discussed that we wanted this to be a broader discussion with all of you as audience members and not just have Liz and Lyda talk up here on the screen. And so I'm going to pose this question to Liz, but definitely we would love for all of you to chime in. And this goes off of the idea that, you know, a lot of these diversity and inclusion initiatives have been in the spotlight in many organizations, like I said, over the past 2 years. Which organizations in your industry are doing, what do you think, you know, various organizations within your industry are doing well, and what are they doing, and kind of can you share what those initiatives look like?
I can barely scrape the surface of this, but there is a network that I recently learned of once I kind of branched out and put myself out there, called Survival Swim Development Network. And they their mission is to mentor and support survival swim instructors. I wish I knew about them before I started CAST, because I could have just joined forces. But I went to their conference in November, and it's collaborative, it's inclusive, it's honoring all voices, not just administration talking. And they brought in 2 different nonprofits that value inclusion. I'm just getting to know them, but I wanted to shout them out. And then there's a Louisiana-based nonprofit called Tank Proof that if anyone uses social media, I just found them there just through shared interests, and their mission is to give zero cost swim lessons and food security to everyone that needs it. And they're just crushing it. And we donate to other nonprofits all the time. We highlight other nonprofits all the time. I actually learned that from a mentor at the Paralympic Working Group. You know, I think it's the underdogs that realize it's better together. But you know, we're new at this. I wanted to highlight them for now, but more importantly, I'm glad we're getting to the Q&A part. Like I said, I'm here to learn as much as anything.
Does anyone else have examples of organizations within your industry that are doing this work particularly well?
I don't know that I'd say that anybody has a gold star yet, but I am proud to see the work that my organization has done. I'm in healthcare. Coincidentally, we hired for our executive team a chief diversity officer. Now, unfortunately, we hired her literally at the beginning of the pandemic. The timing was terrible, but in a lot of ways, it worked out really well, because everyone was now strapped to their computers. And so when we did bias trainings and when we introduced her to our 36,000 employee base, everybody was focused on her background and what she brought to the table, the importance of the trainings that she rolled out. She took on an enormous task, which was, we presumed that we were starting from a place of significant unconscious bias. We're primarily in the South. And we know that these conversations were not happening. We have the community that we serve can be very opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to taking steps that create inclusion and equity. Even something as simple as waving the LGBTQ flag during Pride Month garners both wonderful praise from members of the community, and at the same time, it's always shocking to see some of the other feedback that we get. But like I said in one of my comments, because the message has come directly from our CEO, and they quite literally put money behind the words, right? They've hired the executive person. This isn't somebody who sits, you know, at a director level. No, she is on the executive team. They've highlighted her accomplishments, and then they've put money on these initiatives. We added a core value this year of diversity and inclusion. We've got trainings, we've got targeted missions, and I have to be careful. We don't have a quota in terms of hiring diverse candidates, and we define that a particular way, Lisa, to your point, but we do have targets. And part of that is ensuring that the slate of candidates that we are interviewing at AVP levels and above, right, leadership levels, includes diverse candidates at every single interview slate. The goal there being, right, we're creating that visibility, ensuring that we are seeing that diversity at the highest levels, that the leadership reflects the community that we serve, because that's another big thing. I am located in New Orleans, but we are in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and we are very aware that the patients that we serve are very diverse, but in particular in New Orleans and in the greater New Orleans area, it is a largely Black and African-American community. And it is extremely important that the leadership and the staff and the physicians, that everybody reflects the community that we serve. And we know statistically that patients have better outcomes when they have faith in the people that are helping them. And oftentimes that does come down to, do I see people like me in the room? And do they have my best interest at heart? So I don't know that I would give us a gold star by any stretch. I think the work has just begun, but it started in a way where the message came directly from our executive team, and it wasn't just lip service. It came with, here's an officer who has done this well in other areas. She's on the E team. She has a seat at the table. She's bringing these trainings. She's creating these goals for us, and we are all fully aligned on making that happen. And that meant a lot to me as an employment lawyer, seeing that happen. So
Thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody else want to chime in?
Sure, I would love to. I know something that has really developed over the past few years at our company is we have established, and we have long had a DEI policy on paper, but it really did not have the teeth and really the movement behind it until the past several years. But in that time, we have really made a concerted effort from the top to the bottom to have this be something that is a core value at our company. And part of that, we have established a DEI advisory council. And so that is a group of about 20 members across our organization, some at our headquarters here in Nashville, a lot out in the field as well, because we want to get as much participation from a diverse background of experience, as well as just diversity in race or gender, that type of thing. And so really what we focused on last year is really focusing on conscious inclusion training. And we had our entire executive group go through that at the 4-hour in-person intense training with an outside party. We rolled that down. The entire DEI council went through that, and we have rolled that down to our managing directors, our senior directors, and have really pushed that down from the top. At the same time, we're developing training for individual contributors as well, less in person just because of the logistics of that, but still building on that common language, making sure that it's a priority. Our CEO speaking to that, and making sure that everyone understands that buy-in is from the very top. And if you don't have that buy-in and that participation, and putting the money right where you value, then it's not going to be as successful otherwise. And so we've seen great strides in that. We just had a racial equity audit that was released actually this week, and we'll be moving forward on some best practices as a result from that. So I'm just excited to see, as our company remains committed, how that's going to impact not just our employees, but also the people in our care. And it's exciting time for DEI, and it's also challenging. There's so many areas where you can get off track and off target, and just being able to maintain focus and live that. And that's really what it is, a culture shift, right? Not just at the office, but how you live life.
Thank you so much. I'd also would like to add here that, in the time that I've been in medical school, which is, I'm coming up on the end of it now, but, I've seen the changes happen exponentially in the last 2 years. And I think a large part of that is due to advocacy that, our students have been doing. We hired a vice chancellor of diversity, which was not a position that did not exist prior to last year. So that was brand new. And that person kind of came in and was the point person who kind of took all of these kind of ideas that have been floating around the school for years with nobody to say, we're going to do this right now because that's our priority, and made so many things happen. I just found out today that we solidified a program with Xavier University to do a kind of direct admit for students, because LSU has said for so long that our doctors should look like the patients that we care for. But to take that seriously and to say, here are those people who are going to be those doctors, and give them the opportunity to come to medical school, like that's huge. So, I think people have good intentions, but at times things get lost because everyone has their own job, and maybe this is not your job. And so when you make it your priority, it's incredible how quickly these things can happen. And you know, the changes that it'll make for future students and other people who work at LSU will be like invaluable. So I want to thank you all for sharing what your organizations are doing to keep this work going. To go back to Lisa's question about defining equity, diversity, and inclusion, I know that you had also posted a question on the app about kind of the way that we talk about DEI or ED&I, depending on what the organization wants to prioritize, whether that's diversity or equity. And I know Lyda had been thinking about kind of that question. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about kind of what EDI or ED&I kind of stand for, and how do we try to define it in terms of organizational work.
So I don't, I know there are some official and more academic answers on what all of these are. I think the question was how, let's see, it says within the Tulane community, ED&I is lexicon used to emphasize the need for equity. But most workplaces emphasize diversity though. And then what are the pros and cons of prioritizing equity? So just in thinking of those, and Tina, I don't know if you want to go back to trying to actually define diversity before we talk about those things, just let me know. Well, I think we can, I don't know if we can agree, but I think in general, inclusion is just the, thoughts and ideas and perspectives of everybody matter. And diversity is just having people with multiple unique qualities represented. And then equity is actually like the power distribution and trying to make it consistent for everybody so that everyone has the same. There's a lot of things that go into power, but access, opportunity, resources, et cetera. And so that power distribution is the same no matter who you are. And so anyways, I know we talk about, I think equity is the goal, having like not just having people represented from different places, but that they also have the power to that goes with that, and the agency to guide their lives where they want them to go without these unnecessary barriers and such. But I think the problem with the word equity is it sounds a lot like equality. And I think that a lot of folks shy away from that because, which I think people mistake is that you're talking about equality, or you're talking about making people the same, not embracing all the differences, but we're gonna have everyone look, talk, walk the same. And I think especially in an organization like mine, that is easily misconstrued, especially among our younger junior sailors, because we do wear similar uniforms and there's a lot, wear hairstyles the same or similarly, and there's just a lot of things that look the same. And so when you start saying equity, they think you just want them to be like everybody else. So I think it's in the vernacular. And so it's easier to say diversity. Like that's kind of the marketing piece to this, but equity is the actual goal. So I think that's the pros and cons is, do you want to be very specific and correct, or do you want people to know more clearly what you're talking about? And again, there's pros and cons with whether you go with equity or you go with diversity. Obviously, the fact that we're having a diversity and inclusion, most folks have opted for the diversity route versus the equity route. But I thought what was interesting and kind of looking into that question was just like, that it's not just about having different people at the table, it's about having different people with a voice, with the ability to have the same say at that table that everybody else does.
I think you did a great job of kind of giving us the basic definitions of all three of those things. And I think you really were hitting the nail on the head when you're talking about why I think lots of organizations choose to focus on diversity over equity. I also think that for many organizations to achieve diversity is much easier to do than it is to achieve equity, because to have a leadership board that values equity, it means that they have to change a lot of things. And like you were saying, it changes that power structure. So will that group be in charge anymore if they're an equitable organization? And that's questions that you as a leader who values equity, like you have to grapple with those things. And it's not easy, and there's no clear cut answer. So I think you really hit home there. I wanted to pose another question to the group because I think you all will have something to say about this. And this question came from our Newcomb alumni office, which is to ask, how do we as Tulane or as Newcomb engage a more diverse range of alums when maybe their experience on campus was often negative? I was wondering if anybody on the call might be able to give us an answer to that, or what do you want to see Tulane do that would signal to you that, oh, this institution is taking DEI work seriously and I want to participate in that?
I wonder, Tina, whether, I don't know that these groups keep records, but I wonder whether you have an opportunity to go to some of the student groups to see whether they have records of past presidents, past board members, and reach out to them proactively. Particularly when you're talking about groups for, minorities. So, each college had them at the time. I don't know if they still exist or have been restructured, but I think if you have some of those older groups around, you might be able to look up some old past presidents and see if they're willing to get involved and share their resources, and then maybe they can connect us with other people, because I'm certain that I know at where I work, our resource groups are the places where I learn the most about what our folks are experiencing. And we have resource groups for, all forms of representation. So if you could talk to past presidents of similar groups at Tulane, that might get you somewhere.
Thank you. I think that's a really good idea. I've been thinking about this question myself, which is that I, as someone who is an alum who is involved and would like to continue being involved, I'd like to see, as a student, I was always like, I'm never going to donate to Tulane because that money goes towards things that I don't care about. Or there are plenty of people who donate to Tulane and that money never gets used for anything that I cared about. But now on the other side, I think, I get to say, oh, these are the things that are really important to me. And if you would like to continue to involve me in your organization, I would like to see X, Y, and Z happen. Not saying that I have all of that power, but, just to think that as an alum, you have a voice to kind of guide your home institution, towards something that you think is more valuable. I think that's really important. So
Tina, I just want to jump in real quick to highlight some of the things that you guys have talked about, particularly in terms of how you can engage today on the app on Whova. I know you, for those of you that saw the messages this morning about the roundtable discussion, unfortunately with the tech issues, we really missed a great opportunity for a lot of you to connect with student organizations, particularly BIPOC focused student organizations. We had a lot of students that were going to talk about the great work that they're doing, Daisy, to your point. And so just in terms of kind of what you can do today, some of those student leaders were able to create some discussion topics within the community tab. And I think, that is one of our one of our goals for this conference today is to engage and have those conversations between students and alums and have the students talk about like, hey, these are the things that we're experiencing on campus. This is how we want alums to engage with us and how you all can support the work that we're doing. So I just wanted to highlight that. And if you all have time to check out those discussion topics, and then hopefully we'll try and move some of those student leaders to the afternoon roundtable discussions. This has been incredible. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Well, I don't have any more specific questions, but if anybody in the audience has a question that they would like to talk about now or open up to the group, we would love to take them. And if not, all of your great questions are still posted on that app that we've been using. There is an opportunity to reply answers on there. So all of you can continue to have this discussion after the fact on there, as well as include other people who maybe weren't able to sit for this panel this morning. So if there are no last questions or comments, I think we're going to finish a little bit early. I just want to say thank you again to Liz and Lida for taking the time out to, share your experiences with us. And thank you to all of you who showed up to have this conversation today.
I want to say thank you all so much for being, such an encouraging group and making this a safe space. I think that's the most important. And Tina brushed very briefly on, it may not be anyone's particular job to tackle these issues. And I think that's where things get lost in translation. So I know everyone here is taking that initiative. It would be hard to find a business or a cause that's not at its root about people. When people, when you lose that collaboration and trust and conversation, it doesn't matter what product you're selling or what your mission is. So again, I want to thank you all for, sure it's not in most of your job descriptions, but for kind of making it part of, it's everybody's role, I would say, and for again making this a safe space. That's where it all starts. And I'm open to feedback. I'm new at this. Some of you guys have tons more experience than me, so I hope you'll keep in touch and send us feedback. And I'll also be in New Orleans April 7th and 8th. If anybody's there, I would love to meet you.
Yes, and thank you to everybody. Like Liz says, it was such a warm room, which was nice. I know the nerves were definitely getting to me because, as I told Tina and Liz beforehand, the more you prep for stuff like this, the less prepared you feel. And so, but I got inspired. I have a whole list of things that I can go back to my job with, and, just ideas for, like we said, it's not just our jobs, it's kind of the way we lead our lives overall. And so taking that out of this space and into all of that, I thank you for the ideas and inspiration, and I look forward to further conversations.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.